Come on, Miguel, we have a lunch talk to make.
Oh,
Let's
it's
go.
True.
Guys, and welcome back to our Brussels Lunch Talks. I'm Sebastian, your host, and I'm really happy to be back at the European Parliament because this time I'm actually not alone. I've got my new colleague Miguel with me.
Hi there, it's a real pleasure to be here with you in this cold Brussels morning.
Well, yeah, it might be cold outside, but in the European Parliament there are many hot topics being discussed, and one of them is actually
migration policies. I'm sure it's a topic in which everybody has a strong opinion.
Yeah, that's right, and especially when you think about the fact that the member states, they don't always agree with what's being proposed here at the European level, and I think it's quite a pity, right?
Yeah, for sure it's quite a pity. I mean, migration policies are a quite debated topic, and it has brought us with some of the best things of the European Union, like our beloved Schengen strains. But it's a coin with two heads, right?
Yeah, that's right. But luckily, I know exactly whom we should ask more about this. So let's go. Boeselager, it's such a pleasure to meet you here.
Nice to meet you as well.
I was wondering if you'd like to answer a few questions we're having for you. And in fact, it's really our followers that were wondering, what was the latest book you read that really inspired you?
It might be a bit of a weird answer, but there's a book called On Truth by Terry Pratchett, which is normally like a child book author. But I always liked him, and I think always it was smarter than just for children, it's also for grown-ups, and it's really about the power of propaganda. So it was quite interesting.
Okay, that sounds like a very, very good option. And do you have any rituals or superstitions that you do before going out in public for a speech?
I wouldn't call it rituals or superstitions, but I do try to listen a bit to what people say, because I think very often people give speeches which are very much just reading from their notes and not listening at all to what's said before. And what I try to do is really train myself to listen to what the people say and react to that.
Yeah, that's a very good advice for everyone, I think. And
there's one trick if you want advice, and always think that the people that you're talking to are your best friends and the people that you really, really like, because it will make it easier to speak.
Yeah, that's right. And one last thing, I was wondering, what's actually the favorite thing about working as a member of the European Parliament for you?
That you can really have an impact. You can change laws, and that's really nice, because in the end, it gives you a lot of motivation if you feel that you can improve people's lives, and that's really, I think, what I'm trying to do with my little work here.
Sounds wonderful. Yeah. Damian Boeselager, once again, many thanks for accepting our invitation to take part in this interview. I think it's really a timely moment because this year we have even more and more discussions on several topics that's given the European Parliament elections upcoming this year, and I would like to start with one aspect which relates to your activity as a member of the European Parliament, because in your last report as an MEP that was really about the third country's long-term residents in Europe, and especially concerning the young population and the young talents, which is quite important because in Europe we need such young talents from abroad to stay competitive. How do you consider that the proposed directive could contribute to the social and cultural integration of these young people? And could this be a game changer, especially for foreign students studying here?
Yeah, I mean, in regards to the background of why this law is being changed, it's exactly as you say. We have a labor shortage in Europe, which is quite massive, and a lot of people who are willing to migrate, they often would rather go to the US or to Canada or to, I don't know, New Zealand or somewhere like Australia or something like this, and not Europe. And there are multiple reasons for that. But one reason is, of course, that if you go to Europe as a third country national, you don't go to a united labor market, but you go to 27 different labor markets. So basically, if you go to Bulgaria, for example, then you're stuck with Bulgaria. And then if you want to go to another EU country, you would have to start the process pretty much from scrap again. And that's not super attractive, so, because it's basically 27 labor markets. What we are trying to do with the long-term residence directive, as it's called, like this permanent residence status, is to say, like, look, at least after some years of you living in one of these countries, you should have the chance to go to the others, to just make Europe a bit more attractive. And yes, of course, I think it will help a lot. It will help people who are considering whether they want to come to Europe, because it becomes more attractive in the first place. And it will help all these people who are already here. I mean, just to give you one example of one thing that we're trying to achieve is, normally you get a long-term residence status after around 5 years, yeah? And what we say is that you should be able to take those years from different EU countries. So not just from the last one where you live and where you apply, but also if you spend 2 years in Germany, then 2 years somewhere else, and then 2 years somewhere else, and then maybe in Belgium you want to apply for the long-term residence status, that you can count these different years. And then obviously once you have this long-term residence status, the EU status, that you should be able to, at least from my perspective, have it for the whole European Union, and then be able to travel everywhere with that status and work everywhere with that status.
Well, to me that sounds perfectly logical, and I really hope to see that happening quite soon.
The problem is the interior ministers, they don't really like it so much, but
yeah.
let's see.
That's right. There is always a bit of a battle between these high ambitions from certain members of the European Parliament, but then maybe the EU member states not really agreeing all the time.
You know what the problem is, and then I'll let you ask.
Yes. No.
The people on the other side negotiating is not the ministries of the economy, but it's the ministers of the interior. So basically their whole perspective is, how can we stop abuse, but at the same time, I mean, we are missing, I think over the next 30 years, 50 million people in our workforce are going to decrease. So like, if you look at it from an economic perspective and also from a rights perspective for those those third country nationals, it's a completely different one. But the people I negotiate with are those who always think, oh, it's going to be abused, the system is going to be abused, which is a bit annoying, but the fact. Right?
Yeah, that's quite true indeed. And yeah, speaking of these, let's say, disagreement between the different ministries of internal affairs from member states and the ambitions of the EU, what should be some specific measures implemented from an EU-wide perspective? Because if we rely on the member states, there will be always a differentiated approach. What could the EU on a united basis do in this sense?
Yeah, I mean, as I just said, I think when it comes to labor migration, we need to understand that the world from the outside looks at Europe. Yeah, like, I mean, people I know in Canada or in the US or so on, when they think about migrating here, they think about migrating to Europe. And then only afterwards they start thinking about maybe to France or to Germany or something. That's not the first interest. Like, it's like, I want to go to Europe. So we have to be aware of that and then understand that if we actually offer a common migration policy, it would make much more sense. So I think a common migration system is really something that we would really need. But to be able to get that, maybe that could even include, European visa statuses that are given out by the EU as a whole, not by the individual countries. But to be able to get there, we also need to change the European treaties at some point, I think.
That's true, and perhaps not even for this reason, but for many other reasons.
For the veto of Orban, for like our shitty foreign policy, like a lot of things. Yes, there's a lot of things we should change. Also, the fact that the Commission President is not elected by the European Parliament in the sense of actually, us putting her forward and electing her. I think that's something. There's a lot of stuff that we could improve, and that's what Volt is also about. Yeah.
Well, it's obviously quite interesting to hear about, and I'm also quite hopeful to see this happening very soon. At the same time, I was wondering how could the EU strike a balance between ensuring opportunities for young talents from abroad, but also addressing the concerns related to job competition and economic stability at home. There is always this maybe question mark or discontent saying that if we become super attractive for talents coming from abroad, then what happens to the people here? What's the exact balance between these?
So the issue is we are currently off balance. Yeah? So basically, even under the Corona times when we had a heavy economic downturn, we didn't really see this in the employment numbers. Why? Because the need for people is increasing, while the people who are actually in the workforce is decreasing massively, as I said. So whatever we currently feel as labor shortages is nothing against what's going to come. I met a guy once who told me, look, my job is I'm a statistician for demographics, and it's the most precise social science because you can actually calculate how many people will be there in next year and in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. So it's very simple to forecast. Yeah? And this is the issue. Like, we are currently at the beginning of what we will see in terms of labor shortages. This has a huge impact on prices because inflation will be driven by cost push inflation, basically, so that we have too little people actually working here. We will have the issue which we already see, that we don't find people anymore to do a range of jobs. Yeah, I mean, I know a lot of people who offer vocational training, so like any form of manual labor. In Germany we have the system that you can become a master of a certain craft and so on, like basic craft. And they are not finding any people who can learn their craft, which means these crafts get lost. Yeah, like it's not so. I'm just saying, like, I understand that there is a balance between, we don't want to flood the labor market with cheap labor and then everybody is suffering because it's an exploitation situation. But that's not at all where we are or where we are going. And anyone who can calculate and count knows that this is just not true. Yeah. The biggest risk is that we see an exploitation of the third country nationals. Actually, yeah. Because very often, and I mean, there was a scandal in Germany about this, how third country nationals were like basically for like a huge butcher factory, basically, where they cut meat. They were all put into like little barracks, and then all their money was taken from them again. And so, like, there are exploitative practices. And I think what's really important is that we safeguard the rights of labor migrants, because they're often in a more vulnerable position than maybe people who are nationals. So I think there are some things about, your visa shouldn't be connected to your employer, but it should generally be open for you to switch employers. And so there are some rules what you can do to counter that, and that's really important.
And perhaps the best approach to it, in order to make sure that there is no such case of exploitation, which is absolutely horrific to hear about now in 2024, the approach should be a EU-wide approach, not letting it to the member states, right?
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, there's a lot of discussions currently about how truckers who basically are driving from one country to the next with their goods, how they're exploited because the standards in some country are lower than in another. And I think that's also something where we just have to see there's still disparities between EU countries when it comes to labor rights and to what it looks like if you do cross-border work. I think we can still improve a lot also just within the European Union. I mean, the one example that a lot of us maybe learned about during COVID is you can't just work from another country. Like, you can maybe work from another city in your own country, but if you want to work remotely but still be employed in the original country, that's not so easily possible even for EU citizens. So I think there's a question of how can we make really use of the possibilities of Europe so that it helps us all.
Well, that's definitely a great plan for the future. I hope to see this implemented maybe in the next 5 years, perhaps after the elections. And lastly, to wrap it up, what would be your message for our audience?
It's quite simple. I would say the most important part right now is to safeguard democracy. And the best way to do that is obviously to go voting. I think it's really, really important. But activism is also really important and cool. And I would say it's really important to also go into political parties. It doesn't have to be Volt. I mean, you're very welcome to come, but it's also fine if it's a normal pro-European political party, because currently parties are really dying down to an extent, or at least there's a big difference between us and political parties. Parties sound uncool, unsexy, old, and I think we really need to change that if we want to safeguard our democracy, which is under threat currently.
Thank you very much for this. I think that's a perfect way to end our episode. Once again, I'm really glad that you accepted our invitation.
Thanks
and I hope
for
to see you
inviting
around, continuing with the good work.
Thank you. Thanks for coming.
Well, for now, yes. Well, I think that was quite an interesting discussion with Damian. I really agree with his points, but also I think that was very interesting for our young audience, the young talents coming from abroad willing to come to Europe. What do you think, Miguel?
I'm sure it's gonna be really interesting for them. Like most part of our audience is actually young, so yeah, I think the content on the interview it's gonna be quite enriching for them.
Yeah, and there is actually even more coming. So stay tuned. Don't forget to follow us on our social media channels and yeah, subscribe to our YouTube channel. And then we'll see you next time.